I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar, Reducing and Managing the Cost of Card Payments. My name is Ernie Humphrey, Vice President of Educational Programs for Proformative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. As a 15-plus-year veteran of finance and treasury, I know, as you do, that managing card payment processing costs is frustrating and confusing at best. This presentation focuses in on how to effectively manage electronic payment acceptance costs and the potential implications of the Durbin Amendment in the arena of card payments. Before we get to this subject, I'd like to thank our sponsor who has made it possible for Proformative to bring you this program for free, Optimized Payments Consulting, a renowned leader in helping firms mitigate card payment processing costs. Today we will hear a brief presentation from Anand Goel and Ilya Umansky, and then we will spend the remainder of our time in an open panel discussion. We would like this to be an interactive experience for you, so if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel and send us your questions. We can't promise to get to all of them, but we will do our best, and we'll follow up afterwards on any questions we did not get to. Please note that we will be sending out soft copies of the presentation to all attendees later today, and also note that there are offered CPE credits for the CPAs in today's audience. Those of you who would like CPE credits, you will be getting an email with the presentation from Tanya Walsh, and you can go ahead and send her an email and request the CPE credit at that time. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Anand Goel, the CEO of Optimized Payments. Anand is the president and founder of Optimized Payments Consulting, an innovative Atlanta-based consulting firm focused on helping companies improve the value and performance of their merchant services. Anand has 18 years of management and consulting experience in the financial services and telecommunications industries. Before starting Optimized Payments, Anand was a payments leader at Nova Information System, where he managed the pricing organization for 4 years. Anand holds a Bachelor of Business Administration degree from the University of Texas at Austin and an MBA with honors from the F.W. Olin Graduate School of Business at Babson College. Anand?
Great. Thank you, Ernie. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So the agenda for the webinar today is we're going to talk a little bit about who we are, who Optimized Payments Consulting is, talk about industry trends and insights, and then the topic that's really important to you, why optimize merchant services or payment processing, and we're going to provide you with a framework we use that you can employ yourself to understand and reduce your electronic payment costs. And then a hot topic that's on a lot of people's minds today is the Durbin Amendment and how that's going to impact debit fees, and what's the status of it given some recent developments. And then lastly, we're going to do a corporate case study. One of our clients, Ratner Companies, Ilya Umansky from the Ratner Companies, will be talking about how this framework has benefited them in understanding and reducing their electronic payments costs. So with that, let's begin. So we just got a one-page slide on Optimized Payments Consulting. We are a consulting firm. We started in 2007 in Atlanta, Georgia, and with the sole focus on helping our clients understand and reduce the cost of their electronic payments. And when we talk about electronic payments, a lot of people think about credit and debit cards, but it can also eclipse into ACH payments, alternative payments. For the most part, what's really important to a lot of merchants is really credit and debit card payments, because that seems to be more expensive than the other types of electronic payments. And then at Optimized Payments Consulting, we have developed our own software, and we combine that software with our deep industry expertise to really help our clients realize significant and substantial savings, whether it's from interchange optimization and or processing fees. A unique thing about our firm is we're not affiliated with any acquirer, with any processor or ISO, so we don't sell card processing services, nor do we recommend anyone. We are a completely independent firm, and we're a trusted partner for our clients. And our clients are pretty diverse. They represent retail, internet, B2B, healthcare verticals. with the largest client that we have today. They do over $10 billion in annual credit and debit payments. So with that background, let's talk about electronic payments. This chart, you probably have heard a lot about electronic payments eclipsing cash payments. But just in the last year, debit payments for the first time were greater than cash payments. And as you can imagine, debit payments will continue to grow, especially with merchants pushing debit payments if the Durbin Amendment goes through, and the cost for debit transactions is capped at 12 cents. And we'll talk a little more about that. And when you look at electronic payments, you read this chart from left to right. This is from the Fed studies over the last decade, which basically shows changes in the mix of non-cash payments. So you see the big blue box on the left-hand side where checks represented 57% of non-cash payments. In 2006, they represented 33%. And there's a new Fed study out there where we need to update this chart, and that number is even smaller. So checks, as you all know, have been decreasing over time, but what's been taking its place is a lot of debit payments, whether you're talking about PIN debit, PINless debit, signature debit. They have been increasing, double digits over the last decade. And when you look at, as a lot of you are in the finance organization or treasury, an important metric for you is what is the effective cost of my various payments, and how can I get my customers to pay me with payments that cost me less? This chart takes a $100 transaction, and based on our research, as well as some data points we've gathered from First Annapolis and Nielsen, we put together this chart. So looking at left to right, as you can imagine, ACH are the cheapest ways for most businesses to get paid. And the most expensive payment method is American Express. So these are average costs that have been averaged over a lot of merchants, over a lot of data. But it gives you the general trends. One number that a lot of businesses are surprised by is that cash comes in at 2%. So on a $100 transaction, cash can cost them $2, and you get a lot of questions about that. And I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. But as you follow from the left to right, you got ACH, you got gift cards, private label credit cards, PIN debit, co-branded credit cards, a guaranteed check service, signature debit, and then you get into alternative payment products like Google Checkout or PayPal or Square. Then you have rewards cards from Visa, MasterCard, and Discover, and then lastly you have American Express. So let me make a quick note about why is cash more expensive for a lot of retailers. There are a lot of hidden costs as they relate to cash. So if you look at the slide, it outlines 8 areas where costs creep in as they relate to taking cash, handling cash. So whether it's the labor, whether it's risk. Oops, I don't know why this is going on to the next slide. Sorry, guys. Whether it's insurance costs for people handling cash. As you can imagine, it's a lot of dollar bills and change you have to handle. And all the infrastructure that you need to count, secure, deposit cash, there are a lot of costs associated with it. So for a lot of retailers, they rather take card payments than manage cash. Obviously, that's not true for all the retailers, but for many of them, because there are a lot of risks and costs associated with managing cash. And then when you look at the payments marketplace, there's a lot of buzz around alternative payments. There's 2 things you really want to know, understand about alternative payments. Although there is a lot of buzz, the underlying infrastructure that is used to facilitate alternative payments, for the most part, is the same. So let's take a look at a lot of alternative payments that you might be seeing in the marketplace. So whether you have PayPal, Google Checkout, Amazon, Square, which is a little dongle you put on your iPhone to accept card payments, or Go Payments for Intuit, they use the underlying credit card that you have on file, debit card you have on file, or you might have linked your bank account with your PayPal account or your Google account. In that case, they're taking money out of your bank account via an ACH. Or if you have your Amex or your MasterCard in your PayPal or your Amazon account, that's the underlying card that they're using to facilitate a payment. The value that some of these alternative payments are providing is they're making the merchant, the interface to you, the merchant, a lot cleaner. So if you go with PayPal, they're going to give you a single rate for processing Visa, MasterCard, Discover payments. Same thing with Amazon and Google and Square. So they're kind of simplifying merchant services to you, but the underlying infrastructure is still the same. And that goes for whether you're talking about Revolution Money, Moneta, or Secure Vault payments from eWise. And then on the bottom of this chart, you have instant credit so companies like Bill Me Later, where you get if you're buying something expensive on Amazon or something, or an online retailer, you can get instant credit where you can pay that over time. So understanding that whether you're talking about alternative payments or whether you're talking about your core payments, which is Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, you're using the same sort of infrastructure, and there can be significant value in understanding the cost around these payment types. And for a lot of merchants, when you get your merchant statement at the end of the month, or usually the first week or the first 2 weeks of the following month, you might be getting a PDF file or a paper statement, or you might be downloading data from a processor's website. It's a lot of information, and most companies have no idea what to do with it. And because it is complex and there's a lot of it, a lot of information, they kind of put it out of sight, out of mind. So historically, merchants have treated merchant processing card payments as a utility. Hey, we have to have a provider, we have to have a processor, and whatever they charge is whatever they charge, because we got to have card processing just like we have lights. It's a utility. It's a cost of doing business. And our message is it doesn't have to be a utility. You can leverage payments. It's just like a process, like many other processes you have within your organization, and you can fine-tune that process to improve not only bottom-line results, but also increase top-line results. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. So this is a framework on slide 11 that we have developed over the years that we use for our clients. And it's a framework that you can use to get a better understanding of your payment costs. So whenever you get a sale in, we look at payment products. How can we optimize your products that will reduce your overall cost? How can we optimize pricing, all the fees that you pay your merchant processor? The third thing is, how can you optimize your internal processes which have a direct impact on interchange? So with Visa, MasterCard, Discover combined, there are over 400 different interchange categories. And most merchants have no idea what one interchange category means versus another, but based on what your internal processes are like, you could be paying a much higher interchange rate than you really need to. And we'll talk about each one of these areas a bit more specifically as we get into the presentation. And the last thing is leveraging analytics. So if you get a very lengthy merchant statement with all of this data, somehow you have to put it in, even if you're using Excel or using a business intelligence tool, you have to put it in some sort of a analytics engine so you can really understand what the key metrics are. So I suspect for most of you, you really want to know what's my effective cost of card payments. How is that changing over time? And what's really driving the changes in my effective cost? What are the variables I can control? What are the variables I can't control? Those are some things that analytics will provide to you. And we'll show you some examples of what those analytics might look like. So let's talk about each one of these in order. So first thing is products. When we're looking at products, when we're talking about optimizing products, we're really talking about, it's either one of two things, either expanding your payment methods or fine-tuning the existing payment methods that you have today. So expanding payment methods, there's a CyberSource study that showed merchants that offered 3 or more payment types realized a 14% lift in their sales conversion. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense because consumers indicate that given equivalent product and price, if I go to a merchant who accepts a payment type that I prefer, I'm going to buy from that merchant. So if I really like paying by check, and if I have a merchant that does ACH processing, well, that'd be great. That's something I'd rather shop at a merchant that does ACH processing. Or if I go into a retailer and I like the security of putting in my PIN for debit transactions, and I have 2 retailers that are equivalent, but I'd rather go to a retailer that has a PIN pad so I can put in my PIN versus a retailer that doesn't have a PIN pad. There are subtle differences, but there are 2 upsides here. One is you're offering merchants a payment type that they like, so that's a win. Also, a lot of these other payment types are typically less costly than Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and Discover. So PIN debit is generally cheaper than signature debit. ACHs are always cheaper. And then if you look at some of these alternative payments, depending upon the kind of industry you're in, they might be cheaper for you. So optimizing products. And on the next slide, this slide kind of outlines, on slide 12, you can see you have your traditional Visa, MasterCard, Discover cards, and it also lists some alternative payments that you may want to look into. On slide 13, let's talk about one particular product, which is debit. And I'm going to go through this slide with a caveat that this may change meaningfully with the implementation of Durbin Amendment. So let me give you an overview. There are roughly about 400 million debit cards in the United States. They have the capability of doing PIN, and about 80% of them can do signature debit as well. So signature debit, if you take out a debit card out of your wallet or your purse, signature debit transactions are any transaction that is routed through the Visa MasterCard rails. So if you have a debit card and it's got a Visa MasterCard logo in the front, that card can do signature debit. If you flip that card on the back, you'll see a number of PIN networks listed on the back. They might be something like Interlink, Star, Pulse, NICE, and they're called EFT networks, electronic funds transfer networks. So any given debit card has the capability of going on 2 different rails, the signature rail and the PIN rail. And in PIN transactions above $20 can be up to 60% less expensive than signature debit. And they're 73% up to 73% less expensive than credit cards. So if you're in a retail environment, you really want to have PIN pads so you can take advantage of lower cost associated with PIN debit transactions. And then if you're in an industry that's an emerging market industry like utilities, telecom, insurance, there's something called PIN-less debit. So basically you can use the electronic funds transfer network Let's say you were putting your utility bill online and you put in your debit card number. That transaction can go over one of these EFT networks that's a lot cheaper than the signature debit network. So if you're one of these emerging markets, utilities and telecom insurance, and there are a few others, you really want to look into PINless debit. So just a reminder to you guys, if any questions come to your mind, please type them into your in the chat box or in the question box, and we'll make sure we get to those at the end of the presentation. So when you're optimizing products, a key thing to do would be to really understand, do an internal study, to really understand what is my effective cost for each type of payment product. You know, you might be if you take checks, you really want to get a holistic view. What is it? Even if you use a lockbox service, what is my total cost of checks? It's not just if you're doing guarantee or conversion with verification. There are some direct fees, but there are a lot of other ancillary fees. So if you get a check back for NSF, the cost associated with all the NSF and you know, bad debt, bad checks, the labor it takes to process checks if you're doing it internally, or the fees that you may be paying your bank if you're doing a lockbox service. And then when you're getting into some of these electronic payments, you know, whether it's Visa, MasterCard, credit, or debit, or PIN debit, or Amex Discover, it's really important to know for your organization, because it's not always the same for every single organization. It's important to know what's my mix of these different payment types. So this dashboard, I'm going to review it with you from bottom, starting from the bottom, going to the top. So the first slice shows you my total sales. It's about 100 million right here. And this is the way it's split up amongst these 5 different payment types. So I have my Visa, MasterCard credit cards, my debit cards, PIN debit, Amex, Discover. So Discover is my 1% of my total sales for this time period. And Visa, MasterCard credit are substantially at 60%. Signature debit is at 20%. PIN debit is 12%. Here's my processing fees associated with each of these card types. And then you can break these processing fees on a transaction level. So on average, it costs my organization 75 cents to process a payment through one of these card types. And then you can look at that same payment looking at different payment products. So the cheapest is PIN debit in this example. The most expensive is American Express. Now notice in this example, PIN debit is cheaper than signature debit by 16 cents. So this merchant would have a lot of incentive to drive as many of these signature debit transactions down to PIN debit. And then on the very top slice, it shows you the effective cost. So basically, if you take your total processing cost divided by your sales, you get 1.87% of all your cards. And here's that cost broken out by card type. So PIN debit is the least expensive, and Amex is the most expensive. And then surprisingly, well, Discover is quite close with Visa, MasterCard. So when you're optimizing products, a key thing to do is to do an internal study to really understand, hey, what is my effective cost for each of the payment types that I accept today? That'll give you a sense of, okay, if I try to steer my customers to pay me with a different payment type, this is how much I could save per transaction, or this might be the potential savings if I move X percentage from one payment method to another. Another note on optimizing products is dynamic currency conversion. So if you are a business where you serve a lot of individuals from foreign markets or travelers from abroad, then you may want to look at adding DCC to your payments mix. And basically, it is a product that recognizes cards that are issued outside the U.S. So if I'm a consumer and I am in, let's say I'm in Miami, I'm from Germany, where the currency is the euro. So if I'm at a restaurant in Miami, when my card is run, having this product will prompt the person running the card, say, ask you, would you like to pay, or it could be a retailer, would you like to pay this bill in dollars or in euros? And oftentimes the customer might say euros, and because there's a lot of research that shows customers like paying in their native currency because they understand it better. And so if they pay in euros, that dollar amount is automatically converted into euros. The customer pays you in euros, and your processor automatically settles with you in dollars. And within that conversion, they add on a fee. And usually processors will share that fee with a merchant. So if that fee is, let's say, 2%, the processor will take 1% and they'll give 1% to the merchant. So some businesses, like tour operators, actually use dynamic currency conversion to generate revenue too, while providing a service to their customers. So we've talked about optimizing products. The second thing is optimizing pricing. There's a lot of confusion when we talk about pricing. So let me set some definitions. Interchange is set by Visa, MasterCard as associations in conjunction with their issuing banks, and is pretty much uniform for all the merchants in the United States. So interchange and assessments are set by Visa and MasterCard. Everything else is negotiable, whether it's processing fees, chargeback fees, statement fees, reporting fees. So the key takeaway here is if you have multiple sales channels or divisions or business units, and each of them have their own sort of merchant accounts, contracts, you really want to consolidate them into a single contract, not only to get better pricing, but also for security management, because PCI rules can be, PCI compliance can be very onerous on an organization, and you want to minimize that PCI liability. And if you have agreements with multiple acquirers, and there's sometimes, in some instances, there are some reasons to do that, but if there isn't a specific reason, like, I need this technology from acquirer A and this other technology from acquirer B, and they're both really critical, then there may be some very good reasons for having multiple relationships. But most times, for most organizations, it makes better sense to have a single contract with one acquirer, not only for better pricing, but also for easier PCI compliance. And so when you have your merchant acquiring contract, you really want to understand what are the processing fees you have agreed to in the past if you have an existing contract, and you want to check those fees with the fees on your merchant statement. Are you being charged those fees? When is your contract expired? Because that's the best time to negotiate with your processor. And you want to invest time to understand some of these nuances in the industry. There's a lot of information about merchant services online, and actually there's a lot of companies that sell merchant services online, a lot of big processors and a lot of resellers. So you want to invest a little bit of time to understand the nuances of the payments industry, or get an expert to really help you with the understanding, or help you shift through pricing proposals or RFPs. So one of the questions, still talking about pricing, one of the questions we often get is, hey, who do you recommend as the best processor? Who's the best acquirer to work with in the United States? That is really difficult, because it's kind of like asking someone who travels, who's the best airline. Domestically, I'm sure there's everybody on this call who's had horror stories with just about every airline. And I can tell you, we have clients that have had horror stories with just about every acquirer. But I would say that these acquirers, they're the top 8 largest processors in the United States based on their market share. So these are based on their Nielsen rankings in terms of the number of transactions they processed. in 2009, total Visa, MasterCard, Amex sales process. I believe this is a number of transactions. So First Data, and when you take First Data along with all of their alliance bank partners, their joint ventures with TNC, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, when you take all that, all those relationships and you add them together, they have the largest market share. So this is what I can tell you, that these 8 acquirers, they're all large, reputable, respectable companies, and they all, in terms of finding the best acquirer, it really depends on what your needs are in terms of what is your current point-of-sale solution. So obviously, you want to find an acquirer that is certified to your POS solution. You know, what's important to you? Do you want online reporting? Do you want online chargeback management? What kind of data are you looking for? Are you looking for data you can download into an Excel file and you can manipulate yourself? Those are some of the areas where some of these processors start differentiating themselves. So the key response is, in terms of finding the best acquirer, is really what are your needs, and then it's easier to map to one of these acquirers. Now, it's important to note that you have these 8 acquirers that make up about 87% of the market. But if you go online and if you even look at your current provider, there are nearly 2,000 ISOs and resellers in the marketplace. So ISOs are independent sales organizations that typically, they're varying sizes, that have a relationship with one of these big acquirers, and you know, they resell card processing from one of these acquirers. There may be varying levels of service they may be providing, because there are a lot of there are some ISOs that serve niche markets where they support niche point-of-sale solutions, or in niche verticals like healthcare, or they might provide bilingual customer service, whereas some of the bigger players, they don't necessarily provide bilingual service, customer service, if that's important to a merchant. So if you guys have any specific questions on acquirers, you know, type them into your question box, and maybe we can get to some of them at the end. Kind of reviewing our framework, we talked about optimizing products. Secondly, we talked about optimizing pricing. The third thing is optimizing processes, and a lot of this gets into, you know, managing interchange management. So interchange, for most organizations, I would say for 90+% of the organizations, interchange makes up your biggest component of your cost of processing card payments. It can make up 75 to 95% of your total cost of, interchange and assessments of your acceptance cost. And there are a lot of things that you can't control. Like, you cannot control whether a consumer gives you a rewards card or a purchase card or a business card or a debit card. But what you can control is being in compliance with Visa and MasterCard guidelines for processing transactions. So here are some general sort of rules of thumb. And obviously there are exceptions here. So when you're doing card-not-present transactions, that's what CNP stands for, you want to make sure you submit AVS data, which is the billing zip code for a consumer card. So AVS stands for Address Verification System. So in a card-not-present environment, you want to send the 5-digit zip code along with that transaction record. And you want to get a match and then process that transaction. If you don't get a match, you as a merchant have the discretion of processing a transaction, or you can say you can decline it and have the customer re-enter the zip code because they might have fat-fingered it in, or use another card. So if you, for a consumer card, if you put in AVS data, which is a zip code, you could be looking at saving 40 to 45 basis points, which is meaningful. And then you want to, second example is you want to match authorization amount with a capture amount. So if you're an online retailer or you're selling some sort of goods online, and a customer, you're supposed to charge a customer when you ship the goods, the products. And if you do a split shipment because you have something in stock and the second item that the customer ordered is going to come in 2 weeks, in that case, you want to split the transaction into two and get a separate authorization for each transaction. And then number 3 is if you're a business that gets a number of corporate business purchasing cards, you want to make sure you send in level 2 and level 3 data, because they'll say you'll qualify for much better interchange rates. So those are some ideas and some examples on what we mean by fixing down rates of managing interchange. A couple of other things that you can fine-tune within your organization is if you have some sort of a subscription business, whether it be insurance or health clubs or, I don't know, magazine subscriptions or anything like that, where you're keeping customer card numbers on file, you know, as you can imagine, customer credit cards, they expire. Or a consumer might get a different card or upgrade or downgrade. You know, a number of things can happen to their card. So if you have their card information on file and you go to run that card transaction and it gets declined because you know, the card expired or the card number is no longer valid, Visa, MasterCard, they have account updater services. So you want to utilize those account updater services whereby you can send Visa, MasterCard the account numbers and expiration dates you have on file, and they will append those records and give you updated account numbers and updated expiration dates. The third thing on here is challenging chargebacks. You know, merchants are all over the place when it comes to managing chargebacks. Some have a very fine-tuned process. Some challenge every single chargeback that comes into their organization. I don't necessarily think that's always the smartest idea, because there's cost associated with time and effort associated with challenging or responding to a chargeback. And if you have a chargeback that's $5, regardless of what the reason is, you know, depending on your line of business, you may find that it costs you $20 on average to respond to a chargeback. Well, you know, so something that's less than $20, you may want to just let it go. It might be smart to do that. But if you have chargebacks that you really want to challenge, even if it's fraud related, there's a recent study from CyberSource that came out, I think, a month or two ago. They refresh it every year. That showed that merchants, even the fraud-related chargebacks that they got, they won 42% of them. And that's because the merchant said, oh, here's our authorization code. We did ADS. We did CVV. Here's all of our documentation. So there's a, you know, it's pretty good likelihood that you will win a chargeback, even if you have this information that you can provide in responding to chargebacks. And for reoccurring billers, so one of the big things in the marketplace now is PCI compliance, the cost associated with being PCI compliant or reducing the PCI scope and liabilities. We have done a bit of work here, and the single thing I can tell you is the single best practice in the marketplace is you want to outsource as much of PCI card storage as possible so that you're not storing card data within your organization. Unless you have a super large organization and you have a robust infrastructure that's built around protecting card data, the best practice would be to outsource it where you're storing that card data and expiration information at someone like one of the big acquirers. And then what you're really storing on your premises is a token. It's called tokenization. And whenever you want to charge a card, you have a token, which is a numeric value. You send that to your processor. The processor takes that token and says, okay, this token is associated with this card number, and we're going to charge this card number X amount. So encryption and tokenization services are really can be of real value to merchants who are storing card data. So that's optimizing processes. The fourth thing we want to talk about is analytics. Analytics is really key in the payment space because there's just a lot of information, and a lot of it, especially it's really heavily industry-laden jargon that just confuses the heck out of most people. So you want to invest a little bit of time to really understand of all this data, what's really meaningful, and start tracking it in some sort of format. And I'm going to show you a couple of dashboards that we have developed. That feel free to develop your own dashboards, but the value that they provide. And because just like anything, if you can't track something, you really can't improve upon it. So dashboards, not only for us, for our clients, they allow you to proactively identify problems and trends and apply corrective measures before they become big issues. And they allow you to monitor primary payment cost drivers. And really understanding of all of my payment costs, you want to understand what are the costs that I can control and what are the costs I can't control. And then they allow you to get a really good handle on what's your effective cost of your overall payments, and then by each payment type. And then if you're an organization where you have multiple divisions or stores or regions, if you can slice and dice the data whereby you can look at the effective cost by store, by region, you can get some insights of, here are some things that are working in this one region. Here's my effective cost in region A is 2.15, whereas in region B is 2.5. What's really going on? So that might give you some information to start drilling down to see why is one region or store or division much more higher than another one. And I'll show you an example of a dashboard like that too. So this slide basically shows you what a confusing mess payments is for most treasury folks and CFOs. This dashboard, it may be a bit small on your screens, so you'll be able to see it when you get it, this presentation email to you, but I think you'll get the gist of it. So I'll go through here rather quickly. Starting on the lower left-hand side, actually let's start on the lower right-hand side. It shows you the payments mix by tender type. So you have Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, PIN debit, and checks. So it shows you the mix by tender type over time, so over the last 4 months. And then it shows you the effective cost of each payment type. And then the purple line here is the overall weighted average cost. And then if you swing over to the left side, look at the lower left-hand side. With Amex cards, as you guys know, with Amex, you have a single, for the most part, there's some nuances there. For the most part, you have a single negotiated rate that you pay. You don't really have this thing called interchange categories. But for Visa, MasterCard, Discover, you do. Now, instead of looking at 400 interchange categories, we distilled this down to 5 buckets that we've developed ourselves that give us insight and provide useful information to our client. So, things like, of all the different interchange categories, you can group them into consumer rewards cards, consumer traditional cards, signature debit cards, business cards, and then downgrades. Really, of the 5 buckets, the one you can control is downgrades. And if you look up on the upper left-hand side, this chart shows you the effective cost of each of these 5 buckets. And downgrades are quite expensive, so if you can fix them, you can save yourself quite a bit of money. And the following slides give you some different views on dashboards and different information they may convey. So this slide shows the effective cost by payment type. This looks at it by division. On this slide, each circle, slide 23, each circle This is a retailer that had a couple hundred stores. Each circle represents a store. And we plotted their effective cost on the y-axis and their annual sales on the x-axis. And we wanted to look at, what are the outliers here? So we could look at store 249 and say, hey, why is their effective cost, last year, this is not too bad. Or look at store 230. Why is theirs 2.24, whereas most of them are clustering around here? So the goal of this slide was to really help us identify some outliers. And this slide helped us pinpoint some specific stores that had a lot of downgrades. So the size of the circle represents the total amount of downgrades, and the number represents the store number. So clearly the ones that are highlighted in blue, those are the stores we wanted to focus on first. So I want to give you guys a quick overview and update on the Durbin Amendment. As you may know, the financial reform that was signed into law last year, the Dodd-Frank Act, it was passed in July 21 of 2010, and it contained an amendment, which we call the Durbin Amendment, to regulate debit card interchange fees, both signature and PIN. And here are some of the key dates. On December 16th of last year, the Fed proposed regulatory language with a 90-day comment period, which everybody eagerly watched and merchants were really excited about because it proposed capping debit interchange fees at 12 cents. And there was a 90-day follow comment period, which we provided a feedback to the Fed along with 17,000 other people. The Fed was supposed to come out on the 21st, which was last week, rules finalizing their framework, but they missed that date because they received so much feedback from the marketplace that they couldn't finalize their rules. So the next date to kind of watch out for is July 21. That was their deadline for implementing the Durbin Amendment. So according to the Fed chairman, they believe they will still meet that date. So we will wait and see. But there are a couple of components of the Durbin Amendment that went into effect on July 21, 2010 that it would be good for you to know you could take advantage of immediately. There are other provisions that obviously the Fed is working on. They're working to finalize. So the first thing that went into effect, let's just talk about some of the broader provisions here. So the Fed was going to set standards to restrict debit card interchange fees to an amount that's reasonable and proportional to the cost incurred by the issuer, and they excluded all the smaller issuers that have under 10 billion in assets. So they proposed capping debit fees from 7 to 12 cents with a cap of 12 cents. That's still being worked on, finalized. We don't know if it's going to stay at 12 cents, if they're going to increase it, what they're going to do, but that's still percolating. The second thing was Fed to prevent network exclusivity, so whereby issuers and payment networks, they can't restrict the routing of debit transactions. So they're soliciting feedback from the marketplace, and this is one of the things they talked about in December 16th, is that, should they necessarily have two bugs on the front? Should they have maybe a Visa, MasterCard bugs in the front and multiple networks on the back? Therefore, allowing merchants to choose the cheapest one. So they're still kind of working that through, and that's not finalized. So these two provisions aren't finalized. On the next slide, here are two provisions that are finalized that took effect in July of last year. So you as a merchant are allowed to offer discounts. And what that means is you can offer discounts or incentives to customers who pay by cash, check, debit card, or even credit card. So as long as all the cards within a payment type are treated equally. Basically what this means is if you wanted to, if a customer walks in with a credit card, and you could have a sign, you could tell them, hey, if you pay by a debit card, you'll get a 1% off. You can do that. If they pay by cash, you'll get 2% off. Whatever you want to do. Now, you have some flexibility, but in a retail environment, that gets really complex and kludgy and kind of impacts the customer experience. There are some strategies you can employ online a lot easier, but they're a bit more difficult to do in a retail environment. And some retailers are quite good at this. They offer different rewards points, if they have a loyalty program. So they offer customers different loyalty points based on the card type they use. If they pay by check, they might get more. If they pay by ACH, they might get more rewards points than if they pay by credit card. So it gets a bit complex. Just because you can offer discounts, it doesn't always mean that there's a lot of work you have to do to set up the framework to offer these discounts, because there's a lot of work that goes into managing all the incentives and response, and also seeing what your customers are doing. The other thing you can do right away is, especially if you're a convenience store or if you own a chain of sort of small ticket item stores like dry cleaners, is or you have clients who are who fall into this profile, you can set a minimum limit for accepting cards. It used to be in the past that was illegal based on card network rules, but now merchants can put up a sign that's saying, in order for us to take a credit card, is a $10 minimum. And you can't distinguish between card types. So you can't say it's a $10 minimum for Visa, MasterCard, and a $20 minimum for Amex. You can't do that. But as long as you say it's a $10 minimum for all card types, you can do that. Higher education, and there's some and federal agencies, they've also set a maximum dollar value for accepting cards. So these two provisions of the Durbin Amendment went into effect in July of last year, and they're available to merchants. They have been available for the last 8 months or so. So that's the presentation. Thank you so much, and I want to turn the phone back to Ernie.
Oh, thanks, Anand. That was great. Now I'd like to introduce Ilya Umansky, the Treasury Leader of Ratner Companies. Ilya Umansky is the Treasury Leader of Ratner Companies, which is the largest family-owned and operated chain of hair salons in the country. Ratner Companies operates over 800 salons in 16 states and employs more than 12,000 students. Ratner brands include Hair Cuttery, Bubbles, Colorworks, SIVU, and Salon Plaza. Ilya oversees treasury operations, including cash management and payment processing across all brands. He earned his MBA from the FW Olin School of Business at Babson College and recently earned the CPP certification from the AFP. Ilya?
Thank you, Ernie. Hello, everybody. My pleasure to join you today on this webinar regarding processing payments. As Ernie mentioned, Treasury Leader at Ratner Companies, we, probably as many of you, are a retail operation, and with nearly 1,000 salons and 12,000 stylists, we obviously have some operational and challenges in making sure that our training is appropriate, our pricing is appropriate for credit card processing. And really, when I came to Ratner Companies about 3 or 4 years ago, I had limited knowledge of the intricacies of credit card processing, and as Anand said, it's such a complex and just a dynamic industry that it really takes a lot of expertise to really weed your way through it. So we had actually touched base with Anand and OPC to try to get some external expertise. So if we move to the next slide. As you can imagine, the vast majority of our tender types are credit cards and PIN debit, with cash being second and check and gift card being third and fourth. So our perspective kind of internally was low as far as a priority for merchant card processing, because we really were looking at it as a utility instead of something that we could manage and kind of lead our customers to the best type. So there was really, due to the lack of internal expertise, we went and reached out to Anand and OPC to help us through understanding and getting a little bit clearer picture of where our processing was in relation to between stores as well as industry norms. Next slide. So we went through with Anand the framework that he laid out in his presentation in detail, and I'll just go a little bit more generally through kind of what we did with Anand's direction. So we've always felt like we had a good cost structure, but we didn't really know what that cost structure really looked like. So doing the dashboards and going through the various payment options we offered, we were able to identify those effective costs and where we were basically leaving money on the table. So one thing that we were able to identify was the threshold. It's called the bin file management, and basically it's the threshold of where we prompt our customers to use PIN versus signature. And our threshold was set years ago when we had first really started with our acquirer, and it hadn't been updated. So that's one opportunity that right away in looking at the dashboarding, we were able to identify that we were leaving some money on the table, and we're able to change that threshold for when we prompt folks to use PIN versus signature. And in general, going through the product optimization process, it really gave us confidence that we were offering the right payment types. Also, one of the things that I found very helpful in looking at the tender mix as well as the specific types of cards that our customers are using, it helps identify your customer profile and can be used in just understanding your customer better in loyalty programs and targeted direct marketing. And also, as you know, I know Amex does a marketing kind of co-op with vendors sometimes, so it gives you a better opportunity to kind of do some of those things. Next slide. So in the next step of the framework and optimizing pricing, we looked at our contract and identified where we may fall out of the industry norms and where things kind of made or didn't make sense. So when looking at companies of similar size and our fees as opposed to theirs, we were able to negotiate some pricing changes based on what we were seeing in the marketplace. We were also, again, looking through the dashboards and the specific fees that we were being charged. We found a number of various fees that we really weren't using the services. And as I'm sure many of you know, when you're setting up merchant processing, especially if you're a retailer like us, when you have hundreds and hundreds of locations, there can be mistakes done on the processor side and the acquirer side, or on how you're asking them to set things up. So by looking at all the fees, you're able to identify if something was set up incorrectly. Next, we'll go to the optimizing processes. Again, with 2,000-page PDF statement from the acquirer, I really didn't have the time or desire to comb through it. So the process that Anand has developed with OPC makes it much easier. We, as I'm sure many of you as well, have challenges in getting the best data from our acquirers or exactly the way we'd like to see it. So his database was able to basically take the PDF statements and make it more meaningful by doing an interchange analysis and providing dashboards so that we can see just on one sheet of paper where what are our customers using for payment types, what's it costing us, and where is the opportunity, like in downgrades. Downgrades, we had looked at that. We're working to get to the downgrade at the salon level and do those outliers that Anand had on a previous slide. So I did understand where some of our operational challenges may be and at which salons does the staff need training, or perhaps there's a communication issue as far as network, so things of that sort. We were also able to benchmark our chargebacks, which luckily were minimal. And we at times, as I'm sure many of you do as well, we'll have a network issue. So we'll have a system-wide or a regional outage of the system. And some of the foundation of the way that OPC is aggregating the data and providing it, we're able to identify the swing in downgrades and the resulting increased fees for that time period. So here I'm just mentioning a one-day outage that cost us about $3,000 that allowed me to go back to our IT folks and our processor and say, our network provider, and say, hey, you know, we really need to be recouped for that because it was an issue outside of our control. Next slide. So kind of to tie it all together in the overall framework, it really created, especially for me being fairly new to merchant processing, it provides a structured, organized way to really delve into them at the aggregate level, so at a high level, as well as dive deeper in to see where are our opportunities and where are we leaving the money on the table. So as mentioned here, the insight and education, it just provides that difference between I feel like we get good payments and I know we got good costs. Besides the savings, which were significant, this process of going through this framework with OPC has freed up myself to do other things with my time and the scarce resources in Treasury. And I'm sure many of you get those merchant bank brokers trying to sell merchant bank services. So in getting those phone calls, I'm able to much better communicate with them, understand what they're providing me, and basically just come from a higher level of education and as far as discussing these issues with other vendors. And as new business opportunities come up, it also gives me insight into what I need to be concerned about in doing a new business opportunity. I already mentioned that the customer profiles, but here's a dashboard, and this is basically the same type of dashboard that Anand was showing before, but here in the lower right you'll see that uptick from 3 to 5.5% in downgrades. That was what we were able to identify as the additional cost in having that network outage of having our one-day's transactions downgraded. So this is extremely helpful for myself and to provide it to our finance VP and CFO to give them this information so that they can address our vendors directly and with significant backup. I believe that's it for my part. I'll be happy to speak with any of you. If any of you want to reach out to me, my contact information is included in the presentation, and I hope my experiences have been helpful to you.
Thank you very much, Ilya. That was great information. I just wanted to remind you we've got several questions, but if you haven't asked a question yet, you can do that. Just go into the question area and ask that question. And with that, I'll direct these questions to Anand and Ilya. I just want to clarify these answers. I think you've spoken to them. I just want to answer these questions. One of the questions is it legal to charge customers a surcharge for credit card payments only? Anand?
So the question is it legal to charge a surcharge for credit card payments only? You cannot charge, a merchant cannot charge a surcharge. There are what's called convenience fees. In certain circumstances, a merchant can charge a convenience fee when the merchant truly is providing a convenience. So, for example, if I get my water, gas, electric bill, and unfortunately, I usually pay through my online banking account. If I want to pay by credit card, go to their website and pay by credit card, then my utility charges typically like a $3 or $4.95 convenience fee. They're providing me with the convenience of not having to write a check or to go on my through my online banking account, and the card payment typically posts much faster and quicker. So if I'm like late for a utility payment and I'm really concerned about my electricity being turned off, then the utility is providing me with a convenience by allowing me to pay with a credit card, and therefore they can charge me a convenience fee. There's an article on our website that deals with convenience fees and the general rules that govern convenience fees, and you can find them on our blog under optimizedpayments.com. Go to our blog, and it's one of the first articles we wrote.
Okay, that was great. Another question. Can a merchant combine their CNP and CP transaction to qualify for a tier?
So if I understand the question right, can a merchant combine their CNP and CP, basically card not present and card present volumes, right, to get a better tier?
Yes. That's
so there are a couple of nuances to that question. So the simple answer is, if you're on interchange pass-through pricing, you surely can combine those two to get better pricing. If you're not with the same processor already, but if you have tiered pricing, then it would be you would end up paying more if you combine those two together. I hope that answers the person's question. And if there's a specific scenario, I believe my contact information is on the first slide or one of the first slides in the presentation. Feel free to call, and we can discuss it in a little more detail.
Sure, that's great. And then I don't know for sure if you know this, but someone's asking if you have an update or if you know about the status of, I guess California had a concern over capturing the zip code as part of a credit card transaction. Do you have any knowledge of that, where that's at?
Right, so there's been a lawsuit that's worked its way up to the California Supreme Court, whereby a customer of Williams-Sonoma, they basically, when a customer was paying for their card transaction, paying for their purchase, the store, Williams-Sonoma, captured the zip code, and they stored the zip code, and they used that zip code along with other information they had to create a profile of the customer, and then they used that profile to send direct marketing information to this customer. Basically, what the rulings as they have come down, basically what they state is a merchant cannot store customer information like zip code to create any profile. However, if a customer is using zip code for address verification and they purge that information, that is okay. And that's the direction, that's our understanding of it, and that's the direction we have given our clients. So if you're a merchant operating in California, you can still continue to do ADS with a zip code, but don't store that zip code or don't use it for compiling any sort of a profile of that consumer.
Okay, that was very helpful. Another question. When you enter a pre-authorization code for a credit card, you know in general how many days does it hold that pre-authorization?
So the question is, when you enter a pre-auth code, you know, depending on what kind of merchant it is, it can get a bit more involved. So that's something, if they could call us or send us an email, we can better understand their scenario and give them an answer.
Okay. This is, again, there might be a general question, hopefully. I mean, it's specific. You might have to take this offline. Maybe not. Yeah. Someone says that they receive credit card information on a per-transaction basis and card numbers are retained on a per-order basis. They ask, how is that impacted by PCI?
So they're receiving, so basically,
yeah, so
they're getting.
I'm sorry, I cut off the question. So the card numbers are retained on a per-order basis. How is that impacted by the PCI compliance document?
Okay. So basically, PCI governs the storage and transmission of card data. So if you're taking that information, the card information, there are basically 12 rules that are called a PCI Dirty Dozen that you have to basically follow in storing that information. So I know a lot of smaller merchants, what they'll do is they will get an order with the card information, and they will put the order form along with the card information in a file and in a hanging drawer, right? In a drawer. that exposes you to a lot of liability. You know, there could be an employee who steals that information. So my recommendation to you would be to use a virtual terminal whereby you store the card number on a remote server on your processor servers, and so you have a profile of the customer, the card number is stored there securely, and then you shred up the physical paper form, or you delete the email, and you kind of purge the email. So any sort of physical documentation that has card information, my recommendation to you would be to destroy it and keep it on a secure server using a virtual terminal product from your processor.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Oh, and if you ever needed to use that, oh, Ernie, just one more thing.
Sure.
So in that example, if you store it on a processor server, you can always recall that card number if you ever wanted to charge that customer again for another order they might place in a month or two down the road.
Okay, this is they're all interesting. This is an interesting question. So, so someone is asking, what are your insights as far as the best strategy, maybe for a charity hoping to get online donations that are very small dollars, say, even $1 at a time. Do you think this can be a viable donation model in today's environment?
So basically for small ticket sizes, so if you're a small charity, one is there are nonprofit rates set up from Visa. Then if you're a small charity, dealing with merchant services can be a pain, especially if you're doing very small volumes. My recommendation would be go to someone like a PayPal or Google Checkout where they have special rates for nonprofits. Okay, especially someone doing small volumes, and they don't. I would just recommend checking into those sites.
Okay, I have a question for Ilya. How long did this process take from the initial conversation to really start, getting that that statement downloaded and get those analytics? So how much time was involved on your end to get it set up? And then secondly, is there any maintenance, time involved, or is that just something you can look at the push of a button?
Well, I've been working with Anand on preparing those dashboards. As far as setup time, I think it took us about a month to basically do the first go through, and keep in mind that Anand had to go, and he can speak to this if he likes, to go through the process of basically taking the PDF statement and stripping out the numbers and being able to reproduce that time and time again. And what we were doing is we were really looking at the dashboards and the data on a monthly level, so we would look at a month at a time compared to prior months, and basically compared to our historic trend and for those payment types. So there is some setup time. If you're going to be doing this on your own, I would expect there would be a little bit more of setup time, simply because Anand is an expert in this area and does this primarily in his business. So I'm sure he was able to set it up quicker than somebody who's just kind of starting out. But it really does depend on the output from your acquirer as far as what your data is, how much of it there is, how it's organized, and your level of knowledge of kind of what you're going through. So I definitely think that people can go through this using the information from their acquirer, but obviously a good understanding of this framework does help. So I'm sure that somebody doing it on their own would be a little bit longer, but I think it took us about a month.
Okay.
Anand, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think the one part our software, one of the things that took a little bit of time until we got the format down was extracting all the data out of a PDF into our software. But once we got that down after 1 month's time going forward, it was much faster.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing that you mentioned, which was compelling, was the ability to benchmark your fees. Is that something, Ilya, is that something that Anand had done for you? And Anand, you might want to comment on this. how would someone go about, wanting to benchmark their fees? Is that proprietary information, or are there studies out there people can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I probably should let Anand speak to it. I mean, I really went by Anand's understanding of what the fee structure was. In my case, it was fairly straightforward. It was a PIN debit versus a signature debit, and it was a transaction cost that really ought to have been, if I remember correctly, ought to have been very close to each other, and they were a little bit there. The spread between the two was a little too large. But Anand, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, sure. There are no studies that we know of out in the marketplace where you can benchmark merchant services fees. I know there are some companies that have done that with banking fees, but there's nothing like that for payment processing. So just we have built over the years a large database of what companies pay as part of our overall software package, along with interchange analytics. So it's a lot easier and faster for us to do the benchmarking because we have all that data, and it's proprietary.
Okay, someone's asking this question, which I like to ask. Can you explain what a downgrade, what exactly that means?
Sure. So a downgrade is a naming convention that's used in the payments industry, but we use it specifically to mean when a transaction doesn't adhere to Visa and MasterCard's standards, you downgrade and pay a higher fee. And let me illustrate that with one example. So if a customer walks into your retail store and you swipe a card, and it's a Visa credit card, you swipe a card, you pay one interchange rate. Let's say there's something either wrong with the magnetic stripe or your point-of-sale solution, whereby you have to key in the transaction. You pay, and you key in the transaction, you pay a slightly higher rate. Then, let's say you key in the transaction. Whenever a transaction is keyed in, or it's input on a website for a consumer card, you have to send that transaction with the consumer's billing zip code. If you don't, you downgrade and you pay an additional 45 basis points more than had you sent in the zip code and gotten an AVS match. So a downgrade is defined as when a transaction doesn't comply to Visa, MasterCard's data standards, and you end up paying a higher interchange fee had you complied with their standards.
Okay, that's great. Another question. Can you please, from your perspective, explain what you see as the main advantages and disadvantages between processors like Intuit versus processors like Paymentech?
Sure. So Intuit they've built a large niche market by capturing a lot of merchants who use QuickBooks. So if you're a small business or have small business merchants and they use QuickBooks, Intuit is a logical sort of merchant processor because right within QuickBooks you can generate an invoice, you can send out an invoice to one of your customers via an email, and inside it is a link for the customer to pay you via card, and that link automatically takes you to Intuit's website where they can put information in, and whenever the payment's made, that information gets downloaded into your QuickBooks. So it's all kind of nice, seamless sort of a solution. But if you don't necessarily use QuickBooks, then Chase Paymentech is the second largest merchant processor in the U.S. They have a great platform in their Salem platform for processing card not present transactions. There are a lot of great things that they do well, so it really depends on what your needs are to say which one is better or how they might stack up against each other.
Okay. Question came up more than one. Slide, you mentioned you could set some limit for a credit card transaction. Can you also set a maximum limit for a credit card transaction? I don't know why. I don't know if there. Can you set a max?
As far as, I'll have to check with my colleagues on this, but I don't think the Visa MasterCard rules allow you to set a maximum, but I do know that some businesses, as a part of their process, they do. And for example, if you go into a car dealership, the car dealership isn't going to let you pay for the whole car, with a credit card. I remember when I went, because I love getting points, and so when I went in, I wanted to put up more than, the maximum basically I could put was $3,000 on my credit card, and everything else I had to, I got a loan for. And I know a lot of businesses, when they're, and this is a new challenge for a lot of businesses, so they started accepting card payments, and a lot of their business clients want to use their personal cards or the corporate cards because they want to get points. So businesses were used to seeing, a $500 payment, a $1,000 payment. Now all of a sudden they're seeing a $100,000 payment on a credit card, and getting 1.5% or 2% or 2.5% taken out of a $100,000 payment is huge. So as a business practice, I do know a lot of companies set maximums and may say, the maximum you can pay by a credit card is, $10,000. But I don't think that's allowed by Visa MasterCard, but I don't think they really monitor or police that. And I can check with my colleague and just confirm that.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question. When you mentioned a downgrade,
yeah.
You mentioned an example of a magnetic stripe failure. So someone's asking, when there's a magnetic stripe failure, is it okay to ask for another form of payment other than to manually key the card? Is there any rules around that?
No, not at all. So if you have a mag stripe failure, you can absolutely ask the customer, sorry, this machine isn't reading your card. Do you have another card that I could use? And if you have another card, if the customer has another card, great. If for any reason they don't, then obviously you've got to work with what you got, right?
Okay. One more question here. We've got a couple more in the queue, but what we'll do is we will get those questions posted on Proformative, and then Anand and Ilya can weigh in on those and get those answered. One, maybe I apologize if I asked one before. Are merchants able to stipulate that they can only accept PIN transactions?
I'm sorry, say the question. Can a merchant stipulate that they can only...
Are merchants able to stipulate that they will only accept PIN transactions? So you only want debit PIN transactions, not just what do you call pinless transactions?
Yeah, right, signature debit. Yes, you can do that. So as a merchant, you have complete discretion. If you want to take debit only, like say you want to take PIN debit and signature debit, you can take credit out of the mix. If you only want to take Visa and not take MasterCard, you can do that. If you only want to take PIN debit, you can do that.
Okay, that's fantastic. With that, I'd like to close the Q&A session, and I'd like to thank Anand and Ilya for their great insights today. I'd also like to once again thank Optimized Payments, who's allowed us to put this seminar on for free. What we'll be doing later today is sending you out a survey, and we very much appreciate your feedback because we want to maximize the ROI to our attendees. And I guess once again I said we will put the couple questions we didn't get to up on Proformative and get that link to you in the survey email. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their time, and we very much appreciate your support of Proformative, and have a great day. Thank you.